All right, in this video, I'm gonna walk you through how I did this painting right here. I'm gonna talk about color mixing, using a value map, simplifying the scene into big shapes of flat color, pulling out color and value variations within those shapes, and then putting in the final details. So I actually first painted this scene on location. I used that with a photo reference to paint another painting. Then I painted one more simplified version of that painting for a tutorial that is on my Patreon page. And that's the painting I'm gonna be walking you through today. So for this tutorial, I actually did something I normally don't do, which is I pre-mix my colors. I thought it would be helpful for students that struggle mixing colors to slow down and take a little more time and just focus on mixing the main colors in the scene. All right, now even though I'm gonna be talking about specific colors that I'm mixing to get other colors, I really don't want you to think that color mixing is some kind of recipe. I don't want you watching this video and writing down like mix ultramarine blue with yellow ochre. Like, that's not going to help you to try and memorize what colors to mix. I'd rather you understand how color works. And I always suggest starting with the primaries in white, that's ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium lemon, and titanium white, and getting a hold of those, because you can mix any single color from those colors. And you really want to get to a point when you're mixing a color, you're just thinking, do I need more red, do I need more yellow, or do I need more blue? And when you keep it that simple, you're going to be able to instinctively mix colors. You're not even really going to be thinking about it. You're just going to intuitively know what you need. If you ever learned like the basics of the color wheel and complement colors and all that stuff, you can actually get access to the color mixing video from my Foundations of Oil Painting course. If you want to take a look at that to learn the basics of color mixing, I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. All right, so I start by mixing up, my darkest value, which is kind of up in these palms here. And I want to get the deepest, darkest value that I have here. So I'm going to mix up some ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, yellow ochre, and a little cadmium lemon. Now I'm gonna branch off from that dark green and get some of the lighter greens that I see in these palms. Now these palms are all in shadow, so even though I'm finding lighter values, they should still look like they're in the shadow, so I'm not gonna be getting too bright with these, but I'm just gonna get a little bit brighter, mainly using some ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and cadmium lemon. And after that, I'm gonna find actually one more slightly lighter green value. I feel that the key with greens in a landscape is to desaturate them. That's the most common problem that I see with people, is that they'll make these greens and they won't add enough of green's complement, which is red, to desaturate it. Yellow ochre can come into handy too a lot, because yellow ochre is a desaturated yellow. So, if you mix ultramarine blue and, cadmium lemon, you're gonna get a pretty vibrant, like out of the tube, unrealistic looking green. But if you add some red to it, it's gonna knock it down or mute it or brown it or whatever you wanna call it, and make it look more like a natural earth green. But let's say that you substitute your cadmium lemon for your yellow ochre. Your yellow ochre is already, pretty brown down and desaturated. So if you mix yellow ochre with ultramarine blue, you're already gonna be getting at a pretty, desaturated, natural looking green. But always look for that. Always look to desaturate your greens with its complement, which is red. And again, if I say complement, you have no idea what I'm talking about, highly suggest watching the free color mixing video in the description below. Now I'm going to move to the trunk of this palm tree, which is lighter than the darks in the palms above, but it's still pretty dark. You got to remember, in painting a landscape, there are certain value planes that tend to be true a lot of the times, which is the sky is going to be your lightest plane, followed by your ground plane, and then any slanted planes like hills or mountains, which I don't paint anymore because I live in Florida. And then your darkest value is going to be upright objects like trees, people, houses. Things that are upright are going to have a lot more darker values in them. So even though I'm going lighter, I want to keep this tree trunk color still pretty dark. It's kind of like a dark brown down or desaturated purple. So with the purple, you get the ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, a little bit of white, and then desaturate it with a yellow. Now further up the tree trunk, it gets a little warmer. So I'm gonna branch off from this and mix in a little cadmium red and yellow ochre to warm up this color. Now moving down to the ground, there's a few colors happening in the ground. There's this one darkest color that is very similar to the tree trunk color. It's just slightly lighter. Remember, the ground plane is gonna be lighter than upright objects like the trees. I'm gonna mix up a very similar color, just lighten it a tad. And then there's this light desaturated bluish purple here that, again, I wanna make sure is on the lighter side, but not too light. Like, I don't wanna make this so light that when I put it in the dappled light that it's not gonna read as, bright little beams of light. And I also don't want it to be lighter than my sky. And these beams of light are actually a lot lighter and warmer. So I'm gonna mix up a warmer, lighter color for those. All right, now these trees in the distance here. Key thing here is atmospheric perspective. And that's when things are further away from you, certain colors are going to drop out. First yellows and then reds, and then you're left with blues. So the greens that I'm mixing up for here are not going to have as many yellows in them. But remember that trees in the distance are going to be a little less desaturated. The difference between the darks and the lights are going to be a lot closer together. Now this tree in the foreground on the water, it's a great comparison to these trees that we just mixed up for in the background. You know, this tree in the foreground, the green is a lot more saturated. It's a lot more of a vibrant green. Also, the difference between the dark green and the light greens in this are a lot different than the darks and the lights in the trees in the distance. I'm going to put my palette in black and white here, and you can see how much closer in value the trees in the distance are than the tree here in the foreground. A lot higher contrast between the darks and the lights. All right, and the water, it's kind of this aqua teal turquoise. I have a lot of people asking, how do you get like that color? Do you need to go buy turquoise paint or aqua paint? No, the key is to keep your colors very clean. Make sure you don't mix up any colors when you mix up ultramarine blue, cadmium lemon, and titanium white. It's going to be a very delicate, balanced mixture. You don't want to get too much yellow. You don't want to get too much blue. You need the right amount of white. But if you do that correctly, you can get a really good aqua, turquoise, teal, whatever color. All right, moving on to the drawing. I'm going to use some paint with some paint thinner to draw in the big shapes. I'm not worrying about detail. I'm just trying to mass in the big key shapes that make up the composition. After that, I'm gonna do what I like to call a value map. I guess you could call it an underpainting. It's not really an underpainting. It's not that detailed. I mix up some burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and I use that to map out the key values of the big shape. So like all these trees and everything in the foreground that are really dark, I make that a dark value. And then I create lighter values by thinning the paint more or less to give me a roadmap and to make sure all my values are working in an interesting way and that they're looking correct. And I'm using paint thinner, so this is going to set up pretty quickly, and you know, it should be easy to paint right on top of. It's not really thick paint, it's all relatively thin paint, so you shouldn't have any problem. All right, now I'm going to block out the scene in big shapes of flat color. What does that mean? That means that I'm going to assign pretty much one straight color for each of the big shapes. And I like to work dark to light. I find it easier to lighten paint than darkening it. And all the colors are pre-mixed, so it's pretty easy to lay in all these big shapes. Now, once all the shapes are in, now it's time to pull out subtle variations within those shapes. This is where you're gonna pull out lighter areas that are in the shadows. You're gonna cut back into these big shapes to make them more specific, smaller shapes. Now, be careful that you don't paint something out of its correct value zone. You know, yeah, you're gonna see a lot lighter values and some shadow areas, but you don't want to make those too bright to where they don't read as being in the shadows. Step back, squint your eyes, make sure everything is operating in the proper value range. A good way to mess this up is to get really close to your painting and focused on one little area with a small brush and think, oh, this is so great, this is so detailed, so perfect, and you step back and you're like, wow, that palm that I just painted is way too light and it doesn't look like it's in the shadows. So then you have to paint it again. And at this point, the painting is pretty much there. And it's just a matter of going in with what details you want to, you know, specify the things that you want to specify or simplify. A lot of times the answer to your problems is getting out a big brush and just like dragging it over certain areas to simplify and like pull the colors together. This is where I actually do get out a small brush and get in there with the details that I want to put in. All right, and there you go. Hopefully you can take what you've learned from this video and implement it in your own work. Now, if you want to get some really good painting training, I highly suggest my Foundations of Oil Painting course. I'll put a link to that in the description below. I got full paint along tutorials on my Patreon page, also linked below. If you want to see what I'm painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero here telling you to go get painting.